Good morning from Big Sky Country. I'm Stacy, owner of Montana Used Bricks. Today I want to talk about parts. I want to talk about alternative parts, similar parts, and non-Lego parts. I'd already planned on doing a video talking about alternative parts, and we'll get to that in a minute. I had an order that I sent out that I sent the wrong part because there was two very similar parts and I didn't look at them close enough, and I sent the customer the wrong part. And I kind of want to talk a little bit about how important it is to really look at the parts when you're putting them into inventory. Thirdly, I want to talk a little bit about the non-Lego parts and how I'm able to distinguish those rather quickly now compared to when I first started doing this. It's going to kind of be a three-part video. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the alternative parts. And I just want to tell you why I made the decision that I was going to have all the alternate parts in my store. There are some stores, they just group them all together. It'll say in their terms that they don't distinguish between the alternate parts if it doesn't affect the build, which is fine. But for me, because I'm dealing with used parts, I have a lot of old parts that people are looking for. And it's really important to a lot of people that are recreating sets from their childhood that they get the part that would have come with that set. It's really important to them to get the alternate part. When I first started buying on Bricklink, I was looking for specific parts to rebuild some sets that my son had in the late 90s. And I had ordered some parts, and when I got them, they weren't the parts that came with the set. And I called the store out on it, and they said, hey, look, if you had read our terms, you'd know we don't distinguish between the alternate parts. Which, as a buyer, I was kind of confused by, because it's like, I want that specific part. I don't want the other one. But I understand now, as a seller, how time-consuming it can be to look at each alternate part. To give you an example, I'm going to take it down to my computer and show you what I'm talking about.
A great example of alternate parts or similar parts would be the plate modified 1x1 with clip, because you'll notice that there are 4 different variations to this one part. And this takes quite a while to sort through because they're very similar. It's often difficult to tell which is the thin and which is the thick clip. So I understand why a lot of stores don't want to take the time to sort those out, especially since these do not affect the build in any way. For collectors or people that want to resell the older sets, it is important to them to be able to get the part that came with the set. So even though it's time consuming, it's something I take the time to do. And there are becoming a lot more variations in parts than there was several years ago, because I've noticed that some of the hinges now have with groove, without groove, which they didn't have a couple of years ago. It seems like every time I go in to add parts, there's another variation on that part, and I'm having to spend more time dividing everything out. For me, this is something that I feel is important enough that I take the time to do. As a buyer, I would really suggest that you take the time to read the store terms to see if they do sort their variations out, or if they have a note that if it doesn't affect the build, the variation is undetermined in their store.
When it comes to similar parts, it's really important to look at what you're sending out. I think I made an error when I put these parts into inventory. So when I went to grab them when I was pulling the order, I sent the customer the wrong part. He called me out on it. I looked this morning, and sure enough, I had sent him the wrong part. As a used seller, it's really important to look at all the parts to make sure if there's some that are similar that you are distinguishing between the two and that you're putting them into inventory correctly. This isn't really an issue if you're selling new parts, because you're generally just taking the list from what is available either on Brick Store or Bricklink and just parting it out, so you know that you're putting the right part in. When you're adding used parts, especially from bulk, you never know what part you're really looking at. So it's really important that you look at the part to make sure that you're putting the right part into inventory. And then it's really important, again, when you are pulling the order, to really double check some of those parts that are quite similar. And to give you the example of the one from this morning, it was a Technic part that there's two very similar parts, and had I looked at them closely, I wouldn't have made that mistake. I had someone in the comments a while back ask me how I tell the difference between non-Lego parts and Lego parts. So I thought I would just do a really quick explanation on how I figure out the difference for those. So we're going to take it down to the table. Now I want to talk about the non-Lego parts. And as you can see, I have quite a few parts down here. Some are non-Lego and some are. And as most people know, when you pick up a Lego plate and you look at it, you're going to be able to see the Lego on the studs. So that is the best indicator that you have a Lego part, because it's going to say it right on the stud. If you have a part that is Mega Block or a different brand, you're going to be able to see that in between the studs. Such as Tyco. And this one's a little harder to see, but I don't know if I can get the light just right on it, but it says it between the studs. There's nothing on the studs that says Lego. That's the best indication as you're going through. On some of the Lego, you're going to notice an indent on one of the studs, and that usually indicates it's not Lego. So you can see that just having them sit next to each other, it's really difficult from a distance to be able to tell. But like I said, after a while you start to notice that the colors are a little bit off. You'll notice on these two here that the colors are a little bit different. This is the dark bluish gray. This might be similar to a dark gray, but it's not quite. And usually what I'll do at this point, if I'm looking at this and I think, oh, that must be a dark gray, I will turn it over. I'll look to see if there's anything in the hollow of the stud. There's not, so it's not Lego. Same with these here. This isn't a true tan color. It's not Lego tan. So I was a little surprised. I haven't seen these in other brands before because they're built very similar to Lego, but they're not, because there's no indication in the hollow of the stud that it's Lego. And like I said, the color is just a little bit off. It's not quite the Lego tan. Also, with some of them, they're a different size. With this, you'll notice that it's a little bit thicker than a normal plate. On the plates, the color is really close to, on these two, to the light bluish gray, but when, even from a distance, you can kind of see that there's a mark on one of the studs. So I would just pick it up, look at it, and it shows that it's Mega Block. After a while, you're just able to almost pick these out from a distance. You'd be able to look at them and say, oh, this is and this isn't. It does take a little bit. I still make a lot of mistakes. I go through the used boxes as soon as I get them and pull out as many as I can. And these are actually, these ones here are ones that I have pulled out this weekend as I was going through and sorting some more. And when I go to put them actually into inventory, I will look at them again to see if there's any non-Lego. And I have still put non-Lego parts into inventory just because they're so close in color and I forget to look at the studs. As I've said countless times in my videos, I don't do the minifigures, my husband does, but part of that comment was asking about especially how to tell the minifigures apart. I spent a few minutes talking with my husband and asking him what he looks at, and his first step when he's looking at torsos is just checking to see if the colors look right. And immediately with this one, you can see that the hands are not yellow and they're not the light nougat either. Another giveaway is no Lego on the stud. If you look at this one, you'll be able to see, hopefully, okay, Can't quite see it, but it does say Lego on the studs, and the hands are the yellow. Another way he tells is by looking what he calls the ribs of the Lego. And you can, let me get the lighting just right. Okay. You can see on here that the lavender Lego has almost a complete X, whereas the non-Lego, it's not quite as pronounced. And on this one, he did say that there's older Lego that have more of a stud than the X, but you'll also notice on this non-Lego that the lip of it, you can almost see that there's a groove, and you won't see that on Lego. Also, there's no Lego on the stud. For the legs, he said it's a little bit harder to distinguish non-Lego and Lego legs just because it doesn't say anything on the studs, but it will say it between the studs. There'll be a small stamp of Lego between the studs. And also on the legs, if you look down inside the legs, you'll see that it also says Lego inside. So those are the ways that you would tell. It's a lot harder to tell Lego and non-Lego parts when it comes to the minifigs. It's not as easy as the bricks and plates, so it does take a little bit longer to check these. He also does a very careful check of the pattern, because a lot of times he'll have some he's not sure about, and if he can't find the pattern, then that definitely shows him it's not Lego. Hopefully this quick tutorial was helpful. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. And I also want to take a moment to thank everyone who's left comments. It really means a lot to me to know that you're watching the videos and taking that extra step to leave a comment. And I try to respond to those as quickly as I can, but it doesn't always happen. So if I haven't responded, I probably will. And just know that I appreciate you taking the time to do that. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you really enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.